Good afternoon, everyone. This is Debbie Hart, and I have the honor of serving as the President and CEO of BioNJ and as your host for this afternoon. On behalf of our talented Patient Advocacy Committee and the hardworking BioNJ team, I want to thank you all for taking time to participate in BioNJ's first patient advocacy webinar entitled Helping Companies Achieve a High Return on Investment in Patient Advocacy Programs. We are so lucky here at BioNJ to have many great members of ours working with us to establish a sustainable initiative designed to help facilitate the role of the in-house patient advocate at our member companies. We are particularly grateful to the Patient Advocacy Committee, which includes Jane Gershkowitz of Advocacy Therapeutics, Tammy Carton of Archimedes Pharma, Kara Thompson of Celgene, Dee George and Scott Riccio of Dendreon, Tamara Atkins and Tracy Henriksen of Eli Lilly Inchrome Systems, Diane Getz of PTC Therapeutics, and Elizabeth Brewer of Sanofi. And of course, a special note of thanks to our sponsors, Merrill Datasite, Amicus Therapeutics, Celgene Corporation, and PTC Therapeutics. Also, thank you to Merrill Datasite for their assistance in the survey, which we'll be discussing today, as well as the development of a white paper on patient advocacy, which will advance this initiative further. More to come on that in the new year. Before we get started, I'd like to review the agenda and the logistics for our call. This will be a listen-only call, but we're eager to receive your questions, which you can submit electronically via the box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, and we promise to get to as many of them as possible. Please note that this webinar is being recorded for replay later on the BioNJ website at www.bionj.org. So now let's get right to our speakers. We're pleased to have Jean Campbell of J.F. Campbell Consultants as our moderator. Jean is nationally recognized as a leading rare disease patient advocate with an impressive record in fundraising and corporate relations. Jean served nearly 2 decades with the National Organization for Rare Disorders, most recently serving as VP of Membership Development. Under Jean's leadership, there was significant expansion of several of NORD's programs, along with the creation of its restricted research, medical meeting, organization mentor, and clinical broadcast programs. Jean also played a key role in the establishment of the NORD Corporate Council. She has since created her own consulting company offering nonprofit strategic planning, organizational governance, corporate relations, and program management. Now, Jean is joined by 3 very able experts who bring a wealth of knowledge and ideas to this topic, and they are Jane Gershkowitz, Senior Director of Patient Advocacy and Public Policy at Amicus Therapeutics, Diane Getz, Director of Patient and Professional Advocacy at PTC Therapeutics, and Kara Thompson, Director of Advocacy at Celgene Corporation. Jane joined Amicus Therapeutics in June 2006, where she's responsible for relationship management with U.S. and international patient organizations, directing the company's educational grants and charitable giving programs, strategizing all aspects of patient outreach and education related to clinical trial recruitment. She gives voice to patient concerns such as access, reimbursement, and disease management on cross-functional teams, including alliance teams, and Jane founded Amicus's Patient Advisory Boards program. Meanwhile, Diane Getz is the Director of Patient and Professional Advocacy for PTC Therapeutics, where she serves as liaison with patient advocacy groups focused on rare disorders such as cystic fibrosis, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and spinal muscular atrophy. She's also the point of contact with individual patients and families regarding clinical trial participation. Diane has more than 40 years of experience in health and medical communications and marketing, including serving as the Director of Communications and Marketing for the National Kidney Foundation and in various positions with the American Heart and the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And finally, Kara Thompson. She joined Celgene in 2008 and directs the company's relationships with advocacy organizations focused in oncology and immunology inflammation. Kara works on developing strategies and outreach programs to engage patient thought leaders in research and product development, as well as closely working with the patient advocacy community on patient access. Kara has over 10 years of experience within hematology oncology and more than 15 years in healthcare, with a spectrum of roles including direct patient care, sales, corporate training, product marketing, and patient advocacy. And at this point, I'm delighted to turn over the panel to Jean, who will lead a BioNJ's first ever all-woman panel forward. Thank you all.
Thank you, Debbie. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here at BioNJ and to be able to discuss patient advocacy with my three colleagues, Jane Gershwitz, Kara Thompson, and Diane Getz. We've had many discussions about this topic over the years, and now we'd like to take a look at it from the perspective of some other individuals, as well as from some of the questions we received from people who are attending this webinar. So let's take a first look at the definition of patient advocacy, which is a composite of what this position has been looked at over the years. And if everybody takes a minute to take a look at it, it talks about that it is more than being a good Samaritan, that it talks about being a valuable resource for the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, as well as for the FDA and the NIH and other interested parties, and that many companies have partnered with patient advocacy groups to play a significant role in raising funds and expediting clinical trials and educating the company and the staff and anyone else who's interested in this particular topic. So I think you will agree that it is a good definition, and now we can go on and discuss the first question that was posed in the survey.
One of the first questions that we look at is, we've just seen that definition of patient advocacy, but some of the discussions we've had, we've pulled out nurturing relationships and humanizing and personalizing the rare disease or the condition, and having respectful collaboration. I'd like to ask each of you, how do you define patient advocacy in your world? Anyone? Diane?
Well, at PTC, it's kind of a dual role of being the face of the company to the patient advocacy organizations and to individual patients, and also being the voice of the patient within the company, so that we always keep patient needs at the forefront in everything that we do.
Kara, how do you define it at Celgene?
Right. I think we have some similarities, Diane, in terms of really being that patient-facing individual, which is very rewarding. And I think the other piece of it that's so important is we're responsible for really driving the strategy around our interactions with the patient groups and bringing those insights in so that we're doing and developing the right programs to meet the needs of patients.
Jane?
Well, I would say at Amicus, it's really both of those perspectives. It's our responsibility to develop and to nurture trusted and transparent relationships with the patient community, with the individual patients and their families, and then always to represent the patient perspective within the company, and to do that cross-functionally across program development, and to provide internal education. So by bringing patient organization leaders into the company to explain their disease experience, it's always top of mind with all of the people across the company. And so I think that we probably all do very much the same thing and have very much the same perspective, and we just exercise it a little differently.
I agree. I think that you all bring out some of the same kind of adjectives to describe it. And in the introductory bios, you all shared how long you've been in this role, but I'd like to kind of step back a little bit, and from some of your past life and some of your background, and I know Jane and Diane have worked in the nonprofit sector, and Kara has done some volunteer work there, has also worked as a healthcare professional in the setting of working with patients. How has that influenced your role or how you see patient advocacy that you do now?
For me, I think that it just has made a world of difference. I think that for someone who has come perhaps from a commercial background solely, it would be very difficult to step into a patient advocacy role unless they've had a personal intersection with disease, right, through their family experience or whatever. I think would be very difficult.
Or being on the board.
Or yeah, so that it's a volunteer,
role.
right. So I think that you have to understand what it's like on the other side. And then to be able to straddle that line, I think is really, it's invaluable to a company to bring that perspective. So as you say, to come from the healthcare side and then to have different experiences, whether it's sales or marketing, whatever, but you're always having that intersection with the patient and what's important to the patient is critical.
Kara, how has your healthcare background been helpful to you as your patient advocate?
I mean, I would say, being trained as a nurse, you're constantly looking for one teachable moment for patients so that they can retain and remember and go on and hopefully live, full lives. So I think that's, really beneficial because many of the organizations that we work with are also doing that piece of it. There's also an ability or just a desire to look for those unmet needs where you're able to, really step in and work with patients or, healthcare providers to help fill those. Because at the end of the day, I mean, whether you're a nurse or whether you're working in a patient advocacy role or whether you're a clinical researcher, everything should be going back to, those unmet needs. So I think that's, where kind of that nursing and the nursing mindset, that ability to interact with patients and experiencing it really firsthand, which some of my colleagues here have touched on, brings a lot of color and to this role and this responsibility that we have.
Diane, you were the one who I gleaned from humanizing the patient community, and you feel how important that is to be part of the patient advocacy. Do you think that it makes the patient advocacy community be more receptive to industry?
Oh, I think so. We have been very receptive to having patient groups and individual patients come and visit us to our facilities, speak to our staff, and our scientists find it so motivating to hear from the patients. There they are in the lab working on a very small piece of the big picture, and they don't get to see the end result of their work until they begin to meet patients.
It's kind of a defining moment when that happens. It's an amazing time to do that. One of the things that we also saw in talking about patient advocacy is that so we might have touched a little bit on this, but what do you think about the challenge, about the benefits? We're a little ahead of ourselves. We'll get to the benefits first. The benefits of having a patient advocacy program, and some of the things that pop out to us, of the importance of natural history, is understanding the entire disease experience, and it's also having an informed strategy of how to move ahead. So if you could think about some of the benefits of having your patient advocacy program, can you share them with our audience?
I think we've just learned so much from listening to them. We have had representatives of advocacy groups on our steering committees for our clinical trials to help us set realistic eligibility criteria, realistic primary endpoints, and to be sure that the risk benefit is clear in everything we do. We just listen a lot and learn.
A lot of listening.
Yeah, I agree with Diane. At Advocacy, very, very similar approach in terms of bringing individual patients, families, caregivers in, as well as the organization leaders, so that across our organization, people can really get a comprehensive understanding of what the disease experience is, what the unmet medical needs are, to inform every aspect of science and program management, clinical development. And as many scientists have said, similar to what Diane mentioned, that they work in the lab with the cells, but when they see the kind of people that those cells have come from, it really makes a huge difference. And I think that it adds to their level of motivation, to their passion, when they can really understand the difference. And one of the great benefits that we've had is our patient advisory board. program.
And we're going to discuss
Yeah.
that in a little bit. So
Yeah.
hold that thought, Jim. So Kara, what do you think the benefits are for your patient advocacy program at Celgene, which may have some broader, you have a bit broader audience or patient group community that you deal with than Diane and Jane do. So you really must be juggling a lot of things going on, but a lot of good things.
Yeah. Well, at Celgene, we span across a number of different disease areas, and we're focused in hematology, oncology, and then we've got a number of pipeline agents in immune and inflammatory diseases. So it does really touch on across the spectrum of where and how we're engaged. And I think Diane and Jane talked a lot about some of that early engagement that really helps, and I think that helps inform kind of the strategy and the tactics and gets everybody really rallying around a common mission, for the patients. And I think, I could speak a little bit more to the launch phase, because we've been fortunate to go through a few of those at Celgene. And that is really a critical time, because we're still gathering a lot of insights on the disease and how people are perceiving things. What are the challenges with side effects that we should be focused in on? And that's a huge issue in hematology, oncology. And so, as I say to my 3-year-old, you have your listening ears on, and that's very important for us and our roles, and then to be able to share that back to the organization so that what we're doing makes sense to the people that we're doing it for. At the end of the day, we're all in this to do it for the patient, no matter if you're in this role, you're in human resources, or you're in marketing.
We've just discussed how it's important to the company. So how do you think your company's patient advocacy program, how does that benefit the patient group?
Well, from early development, I think it's very important that from the preclinical time, that the patient organization, the patient community, they're really your partner. Because without their understanding of what you're doing and your understanding of their needs and their unmet needs, how do you develop a program that can really be beneficial? And if they don't understand the science, they don't understand the technology, you can't help to appropriately manage their expectations, because with media, they could hear of something and it's like, oh, it's the next best thing. Well, it could be, but it could be 15 years from now, or not 5 months from now.
Right.
And so it helps them to understand what the real process is of drug development and what their role in it can be, because if they're well educated and they understand the process and when it may be time for them to be able to make an educated decision about a clinical study that might be appropriate for them or family members, you want them to be as educated as possible. And that's where the patient organization can be helpful, because certainly we know that patients look to their disease advocacy organization sometimes more so than they look to the physician, because while they may trust the physician, particularly in the rare disease space, physicians may not have the most cutting-edge information. Right. And they look to the patient organization. So you want to have that trusted relationship with information sharing.
Have you had any experiences, Diane, where you've seen where your programs are really beneficial to the patient group? Or how does your program truly benefit one-on-one with the patient advocacy group? You have a lot of interaction with them?
We do. We go to their meetings. We're invited to present the research that we're doing. We're helping them to understand in one particular therapeutic area where there is no drug for muscular dystrophy. It's been quite a journey together to do the first late-stage trial for muscular dystrophy and figure it out way. It led to insights. It led the community to do a natural history study to understand this disease, which really hadn't been studied all that well, and just brought about fascinating information for all of us.
One of the things I've seen, having worked in the patient disease space and working with a lot of organizations, is that patient advocacy programs from companies has helped some of these groups mature and help them to be better stewards of their mission. And as the patient advocacy departments have grown, so have the organizations, which is really a good thing. So it's interesting to see how you walk parallel together, and that's pretty cool.
One of the rewarding parts of my job has been actually being able to help the organizations as organizations. Mm-hmm. And just this morning I wrote an email connecting somebody with a very young, small disease group that wanted to establish multidisciplinary committees with another slightly older, slightly larger group that has just gone through that process and is willing to share what they've learned.
And that is fabulous. I'm really glad to hear that, because also, as I see around the room here, is that we have 3 different companies represented at the table, but you're all sharing the hats of the patient advocacy, and your competitiveness is left at the door. That we're all in here together, and I think it's great because I know that each of you, as well as some of your other peers, call each other up and say, you know, I've been in this circumstance. Have you had experience in it? Do you think that that's a benefit?
Absolutely. I mean, Diane and I, for years, have been trading ideas, information. You know, can you help me figure this one out? We absolutely
have. You done this before?
Yeah, have you done this before? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's trading best practices, because really this is a relatively nascent area of the industry. And I think just in the last year or so, we're actually seeing where patient advocacy, which I think has really grown out of the rare disease space, is starting to gain more traction across the life sciences. We've all been, we were all at a conference together this summer, which we recognized was the very first conference just for patient advocacy professionals. And now even conferences that relate to access and compliance and adherence now take the patient advocacy piece with it, because it does cross over into these other areas. So when there are approved products, or there are products that are in late stage and it's expanded access and things like that, the role of patient advocacy is critical, because you've got that understanding of disease experience, of community behaviors, and it helps to inform how companies are going to make decisions around their expanded access, their patient assistance programs, and other things that will help with the uptake of a drug. And now that, you know, your company is further along, and I'd be interested, you know, what you've experienced with that.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to, you know, one of the really delightful things that I've found in working with the patient advocacy community is that, you know, like many of us in our departments, we need to be pretty focused and mindful of our resources, and that's, you know, amplified in the advocacy community, in the nonprofit community. And so I found that because we work across a number of different disease areas, it is really lovely to make some connections between people who are, you know, really doing interesting programming. One of the other things that we've seen that's been very interesting in the oncology space is that many of the organizations that we work with are kind of at a, you know, at a tipping point, right? Where they're just about ready to, you know, kind of, you know, pop or move into a new area and really, you know, expand and blossom. And what we do, not only in our role, but what our companies do in developing these products and ensuring that we're keeping them in the loop, they benefit from that, because the more treatable these diseases come, the more the community and the public at large is open to hearing that message and wanting to hear it from them. So that's been really, you know, really exciting in some of the disease areas that I've worked in really within probably this past year. I've seen that happen a couple of times. That's great. Yeah.
I think we could probably go on and on about the benefits of patient advocacy. We could probably do a whole 2-hour session on that alone, but we really have to discuss there are always benefits, but there are also what we like to say as challenges. So we want to look at some of the challenges that come with that patient advocacy role, and once again, we've talked about this, and things that kind of pop out is the internal value perception. And we look at the affordability of the entire program, a little bit of the program, some part of the program, and also how do we meet the ever-growing global needs
of the patient advocacy community. And so one of you can just jump in here and take that on.
Well, I think this links a little bit to what I said before, is that I think patient advocacy has really emerged from rare diseases. And when you're working in a company where not everybody has that footing, and people have come from big pharma and from a variety of backgrounds, they may not have that experience of working or having the interaction with patients directly, and they may not feel that it's comfortable to do that, particularly people from clinical operations. I know that years ago when we have had lunch and learn programs, for example, it's been the experience that some people from clinical operations would not want to go because they didn't want to see a patient. They were afraid that it might somehow adversely affect how they did their job in running a study, monitoring at a site, whatever it was, even if that patient wasn't in one of our studies, which typically they weren't. But it just, they thought that from the big pharma rules and regulations, you're not supposed to see a patient, that's like off limits. And so that's one little example, but to get them to understand that if you come to a patient advisory board meeting, it's okay, because you'll really learn something that can help you. And that definitely took some time for people to just get more comfortable with that if this wasn't the background that they were coming from. So I just think that that's one small aspect of the challenge.
And budget is always a challenge.
Budget, money.
We work in a number of different therapeutic areas on a small budget, and can't fund as broadly as we'd like to all of the groups. So that's difficult. And another really is managing expectations of patients and families about the drug discovery process, the drug development process, and how it can easily be 10, 12 years before a drug is on the market.
We were just discussing that ahead of time, a little bit about that. Yeah, you're right. It's interesting. Kara, what are your hurdles?
So, I think these are all true hurdles. The other one that I've, really recognized over this past year as our patient advocacy team now also wears a global hat is how different advocacy is outside of the U.S. And we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, really, I truly believe that patient advocacy is done best at a local level to meet, local patient needs. It's a time-consuming process, and that's really, the beauty of it and how we learn so much from it. But on the flip side, we need to offer, our affiliates, that are operating in other countries, some type of, of assistance and help and a roadmap to work in developing those relationships, because we've all seen how great it is when you start early and really get out there and listen to what's happening in that community, how helpful that is later in the process. And sometimes outside of the U.S., many times, because the access is such a big issue, the approvals and the access are such an issue with, particularly in Europe, many of the groups are focused on that, and our advocacy person might wear multiple hats. There's a market access person and an advocacy person. So it is kind of a continual teaching process, I think, that we're still trying to get right.
This is where we get to really interject one of the questions that was pre-presented to the group prior to the broadcast. And so Stacy Beckert has an interesting question that says, how are you sharing information with advocacy groups about investigational therapies, whether they're new or expanded indications?
Well, by attending their meetings, presenting our data, we have gotten a lot of help from the group in spreading the word about our clinical trials. Our last trial in dystrophy was in 11 countries, and in 10 of those we had patient advocacy groups who took our FAQs about the trials, translated them, or we presented them with this translated information, put it on their website, put it in their newsletters, handed it out at their meetings. So it's been very valuable to have them as as partners, and they're eager for this information. And I think that you're right, Tara. Europe is somewhat different. They're somewhat behind us, but they're growing and they're changing and they're catching up to the U.S. idea of what patient power really means and how advocacy can move it home.
Yeah, I completely agree with Diane. We've had very similar experiences where we're asked to present current research information, program progress at meetings and conferences, and we partner with our medical affairs colleagues to do that. The patient advocacy can only present certain kinds of information, whereas our medical affairs colleagues can do the clinical data. But we also will be asked to verify accuracy when an organization drafts their own newsletter article or something like that. So we always respond to requests. We do not proactively send articles for insertion in their publications or on their websites, but we will respond to requests. They will often ask for links to our website and to publications that may be posted as PDFs and things like that. So you've got that back and forth in terms of education, whether it's for general technology or, as Diane said, for ongoing clinical studies. And then when we do have company updates, when we do have news that's related to a program and to a clinical study, we will make sure that we send them that press release with a cover email, that we will let them know what's going on and that we entertain their questions and that we're always available. And we also, because compliance issues are changing and we have to change with those, we make sure that we have written requests from the organization leaders on file so that we are never being perceived as being proactively soliciting, but that we're getting the requests from them. And that's, you know, relatively new for us here. That's more European in nature. But it's something that's happening here as the regulators change how we can operate, but we can still operate. We just have to do it within the confines of the regulation.
Yeah, we find the same thing. We will defer to local expertise in terms of what the regulations are for interactions. But I think our team has a great partnership both with our medical affairs team and with our clinical team. So we're really able to, you know, work with them depending on, you know, what product it is and where it is in the pipeline, you know, and really what a patient organization might need to know. I mean, some are so savvy with helping to guide and navigate patients appropriately to clinical trial opportunities. And that's not to say they're endorsing one of a cell gene trial over an amicus trial. Yes, exactly. But they are, I mean, if you look at, you know, in oncology in general, some of the numbers say that it's about 2% of adults actually go into clinical trial.
In general.
And so, you're right, anything that we can do to help build, you know, additional capability at the patient advocacy organization and see that tide raise will, you know, will help us all. So there's great programs that we've been a part of to help build that.
And one thing that I'll mention that we're still seeing for patient organizations, even as they grow and become more sophisticated, is that in their membership, they're always getting newly diagnosed folks who are not familiar with the whole process. Right. And so when any of us or our colleagues are out there sharing information about our studies, you'll always get people who don't understand the difference between a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3, and they'll still look toward us as patient advocates, you know, disease or company agnostic, and say, could you help us understand the whole process? And so that's just another whole area in terms of just general education that we see the patient community needing. I think they will come to us regardless of who we are or what company, and they'll often ask those questions or ask for clarification of that.
Well, I hope, Stacy, that Jane and Diane and Kara have answered your questions. I just have one more question from the audience that is kind of pertains to this, and it has to do a little bit with the budgetary comment that Diane made before. So Sarah Khan has a great question that I know we've discussed at length, among patient advocates? And how do you balance funding for groups with advocacy grassroots requests of the group in order to avoid conflict? And this is a great question, Sarah. Thank you so much.
I think, Jane, you have.
Oh, thanks, Diane. Okay, so yeah, certainly in most of these spaces there are more than one. There's more than one organization. Sometimes there are 2, and sometimes there could be 12. And really, what it is you don't have favorites. You don't pick one over another. But as Kara was saying, organizations are all at different points in their own evolution and their own sophistication. So there could be 12, but maybe only 3 ask. You can't give if someone doesn't ask, number one. So it's really up to the organizations to know where they are in their own budgetary process, and they have to understand that companies are developing their annual budgets earlier and earlier every year, and so it would really behoove them to get in touch with the companies, because we can't really reach out and say, do you want money from us? But to say, what is your process? When do you need to receive requests? And it should be part of the ongoing conversation as well, so that you can ask about what their plans are for the next year. And then if they know that they're planning meetings, well, that might help them understand that if they're looking for support, they need to plan ahead. And also, again, you can't give if someone doesn't ask. And you typically know in your disease space what kinds of meetings may occur every single year, what kinds of programs or projects might happen every year, every other year, and that you may have been asked for. And you can plan for amounts in your budget, but again, you can't give if you're not asked.
Okay. Diane or Kara, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, if you
Diane
look at how these groups get started, you have the first group, and then some of the people associated with that organization decide that maybe it's not putting enough money into research, or it's putting too much money into research, and they kind of splinter off and start another group, and so you end up with groups that have different focuses, that have different strengths and weaknesses. They may have a great grassroots organization. They can really get out there and lobby and write letters, or they have a celebrity spokesperson attached, so they get good media coverage. They're very good on disease education. So, you can tailor your grants to these organizations depending on what aligns with your objectives.
Yeah. Kara?
Just to add something a little bit different, I think those are all really good points. Is another really important thing for us to look at is really what is the expected outcome of of the program that you'd be looking at funding, and then how are they going to measure that? And then I think our role as in the company is to really follow up and find out what did you learn from that program, what could be enhanced potentially. In the next year, what went well, what didn't. Those are all kind of key learnings that that come out of things that that can really help drive some of that decision making in the following year. So I think that the idea of metrics and reporting those back is something really really important these days.
And compliance comes into it too, whether you align with a particular project or whether you're given core funding only. So those are issues I think that change based on disease area, based on your corporate objectives and priorities.
So, Sarah, you asked a really great question, and another one that we could go on and on about. One thing I will say from my experience in having discussion with companies that are struggling with how to spread out their funding sources is that they are relooking at their internal ways of their charitable giving and getting all of their colleagues within the company on board so that everybody follows the corporate giving structure and nobody is playing outside of that structure. It really is important here for me to have Debbie jump in here for a minute.
Yeah, if I may, to our listeners, we are happy to answer as many of your questions as we can, and some of you submitted them ahead of time. For those of you who are developing questions as our speakers are speaking, you can go to the lower right-hand corner of your screen and you can send them electronically. So thank you, Jean.
You're welcome. So we're really getting some interesting discussion here. So we're going to move a little bit from the challenges, and I'm going to ask you all about, so we've talked about the benefits, talked about the challenges. What are your recommendations on how to overcome the challenges of either establishing or expanding an existing patient advocacy program? And once again, some of the things that we've popped out about was resource reality. What is the reality of the resources that you have at hand? It's not PR or marketing. You know, from where does it give birth and where does it report? And aligning your objectives. Is everybody on board and getting all your objectives together? So I'm looking at each of you and you're all nodding your heads. Who wants to go first? Diane.
All right. I think first you have to recognize that advocacy is not a marketing program, that the benefits can't be measured in traditional ways. You can't look at ROI. It's not there. But that patients and advocacy groups can become important allies, and they must be treated with respect and honesty and transparency. So you need buy-in from your colleagues across the company that, you know, this is an important adjunct to what we do, and we can learn and inform our decisions and grow our business based on our partnership with others.
Yeah, I agree with Diane, and also I think a couple of things, that when you have a budget that is limited and you manage it carefully, you can get certain things accomplished with it, and you can also learn how to parlay that into an increased spend over time. And some of that, for example, if you work with a group and you have a modest amount to support them with, but yet you work on the relationship, because I really believe this is all relationship management.
Right.
And you work with them and you have that transparent, trusted rapport. And then there is something around a clinical study, for example, where you're seeing that from other aspects of the organization, you're not getting the uptake in a particular geography that you would expect to be there, because the patient community is saying, we want this study, we have this unmet need, and yet the physicians in that same geography are saying, we don't have the patients for the study. Then there's a way to communicate, to work together, and the patient organization, hearing that the physicians are saying, no, we don't have patients who are interested, they can actually do some more work on the ground, and they can drum up the interest. And through the education process, through communication, things can happen. We have had that experience. And then you can go back and say, look, through this relationship and through a very small amount of funds that we may give for just general operating on on a regular basis, we've been able to really develop something that does have a return. It's not the same kind of return on investment that your typical finance people might be looking for. But if in a rare disease it results in 8 patients in a clinical study, that is a huge return.
That is a huge return. A very creative return. Kara, anything to add?
I would just say, from our perspective, our team really does try to position ourselves with the advocacy community and establish the understanding with them that we are their advocates inside of the company. And that's something really critical to understand, because as what we're trying to do working internally is to understand corporate objectives, right, for each of the teams, whether it's by product or by disease state. So then we can really identify what are some of our key patient advocacy objectives, and that allows us to go out and really, work freely and with some creativity with the patient advocacy community on, where an unmet need might be and how we could work together to meet that. So that's where you start by aligning your objectives and then pulling it through all the way to the, the patient organization. And I think, when working with some of the patient organization, it is really important for us to be able to share these are the types of things we might be interested in. You know, it's not good to make them guess as to what it is we're going to be interested in. So as being as in the forefront as possible about really here's where our interests are, here's where some of the gaps are in our knowledge. How might we be able to work together on that? But we've really seen a problem with this happening to patients. Are you hearing that when it's calling in? And just that's really down in the weeds. I recognize, but that's what the job is, and that's what it entails.
Yeah. And one thing is sometimes with individual patients, and we haven't talked too much about that yet.
And we're going to get into that a little bit now because since we have a lot of questions coming in, we have a couple that we have to address. I'm just going to go one more of our planned questions, and then we're going to take some of the questions that have been coming in. But I think this is an important point to ask each of you, and it's about, can you share some of your diverse patient advocacy experiences, and ranging from patient advocacy boards and clinical trial steering committees, and always conducting inclusive conversations. So let's try to talk just very briefly about this, and then we want to get to some questions. So, Kara.
So I would say, one of the things that we found very helpful is to have a common thread or a theme, right, through which we have our patient advocacy program rally around. And that's helpful both kind of internally and externally. So I talked about how important it is for the groups that we work with to understand the types of things that we're going to be interested in, for them to really understand our company and our commitment to patient advocacy and patients and the unmet medical needs. And that starts with our senior leadership. And so we do make a strong effort to bring our senior leaders to the table to really sit down and hear from the patient advocates, what's going on inside of their organizations, what their priorities are, and where those are driving from. And so we find that to be a really helpful part of a lot of the one-on-one dialogues that we have with the advocacy organizations throughout the year. And it seems to be one of the things that we will ask for feedback around. Are there things that we're doing well, or are there things that we could potentially be doing better to serve your needs? And that continues to be something that is really important to the to the organization.
Diane?
We have on our board a number of our investors. We're privately held. We dived in for a board meeting for moms of kids who were in our trial, so that they could talk about what the drug did for their son. And it really completely blew away the board to hear this firsthand, and totally changed their mind about where to put the next dollar.
Interesting.
So
That's been very compelling. Jane? Yes.
Well, we have our patient advisory board program. We have it for each disease area, and it's typically a day and a half to a 2-day meeting twice a year. And we have a whole process by which people are selected after they have applied to serve on the board. And it's diverse by age, by geography, by disease experience. And we bring in people across the company from senior execs to line people. And we have people from other functions give the agenda items of the things that they want to hear from the patients who represent either organizations or themselves and their community experience. And it has made a huge difference in how we do studies, how we look at informed consent documents, you name it.
So we're going to digress a little bit and go to some questions that came from our audience now and combine it with some of the ones that we have from before. So Mike Edwards had asked us, how are your patient advocacy team staffed? What functions do you think are important as to build a successful program? And we also have someone who's on the line now that says, where is that? Who does the patient advocacy report to? And is it medical affairs? Is it sales and marketing? Is it general administration? Is it PR? So if we can we only have like 8 minutes left, so we can kind of get through some of these questions. Who wants to?
So my team at Amicus is myself and an associate director and she has in excess of 20 years of clinical lysosomal disease experience as a genetics nurse. We usually have an intern who assists on a year-round basis, and we both work very long hours and travel everywhere, and certainly could use more help. But as far as I know, we're pretty much like everybody else, we're lean.
Well, we're very lean. It's me. It's been anywhere from 1 to 2.5, and right now our needs are, for me to be doing this, I go to 12 to 14 meetings a year in the U.S. and in other countries, some one-day meetings, some over the weekend. I report to the president. I think that as we expand and add a medical affairs function, that this patient advocacy will move into medical affairs. But I imagine that Kara, with the food products, has a different story.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this question obviously varies for each of us, and it's going to really be dependent upon where your products are in your life cycle and where you are in kind of development and commercialization. Our patient advocacy role, at one time kind of resided around multiple places in the company, so there were multiple touch points with the advocacy organizations. Then an important decision was made that it needed to be a centralized function, and so it began in medical affairs. And then just this year, we formed a corporate affairs structure as Celgene has been growing, and we have more products in the market. And so now our team resides in corporate affairs, and we've been very lucky to have growth, and it's actually allowed our team to grow. So we have a person dedicated to patient advocacy in Europe, and then there are 3 of us that work globally, with our most recent addition being a VP to our team for patient advocacy specifically.
One of our attendees have asked you, primarily you utilize internal MA or MSLs for advocacy. Are there any companies that have dedicated MSLs for patient advocacy? You're shaking your head no, James.
Excuse me. Our MSLs will attend some patient meetings with patient advocacy, and that's really for the purpose of presenting data. Okay. And also because some of these KOLs and the physicians and study coordinators may also attend patient meetings, so it's an opportunity to intersect with those relationships. But no, patient advocacy is responsible for that.
Diane?
Either our scientists or our clinical team members. We don't have MSLs.
You don't have MSLs, Kara?
And we do have medical field people who are they're trained to interact with advocacy, and their interactions do need to be upon request, to go in and to present any sort of information.
This is a combination of questions. If you don't measure your impact with traditional ROI, how do you measure the results of your work? And in combination, another question came out with, what are the metrics by which patient advocacy performance is measured? So anyone want to tackle that?
Well, we still have to go by, we still look at corporate goals and objectives for the year. We have our own goals and objectives for the department, and we still have performance reviews like everybody else.
Anyone?
Yeah, I would have to say
the same thing. Without approval, what is the legal status and your corporate policy of discussing off-label data vis-a-vis the recent ruling of providing such information that is protected by the freedom of speech?
Well, if you don't have an approved product, you can't have off-label.
There we go. There we go. Let's really answer that very quickly. So once approved, once your treatment is approved, what is the role of patient advocacy once you have an approval? And Kara can probably relate to this one. And also, does the patient advocacy you handle or oversee indigent patient programs?
So I would say the role of patient advocacy once your product is approved is, it doesn't really change. You're still listening to the community. You're trying to understand how, where, and why your product fits for patients and what their needs might be that you haven't anticipated. At that time, you're really kind of building out all of your materials that are going to, support the healthcare professionals that are going to support the patients. So it really does become a critical time to, vet your messaging, vet any of your programs, be thinking about your unbranded platforms, and those can be critical intersections with the advocacy community. And you tend to have more resources at that point, once you've got an approved product. Yes. And then just to the question of the indigent patient program, so for Celgene, that actually runs through a separate patient support department. What we're responsible for are relationships with 501c3 foundations that would help fill the gap.
And that's a good clear. William Healy did put in a question earlier. We were discussing this just before we went on air, and it says, what is the role of social media in patient advocacy and awareness efforts?
Well, social media is being used by patient organizations, by the individual patients themselves as a means of sharing information, giving support to each other, and just exploring disease experience. There are some companies that utilize social media, but it seems to be more around clinical trials specifically for just getting information out there. There are YouTube channels to help people understand disease state. But, there are no hard and fast guidelines yet from the regulatory authorities. So I think that most people are waiting to see, until the jury's in on that. Some of us certainly have been involved with social media from the early days in terms of blogs and listservs and chat rooms and observing them, and the community knows that they're being observed by industry and healthcare providers because we want to understand what are their needs, what are their concerns, what are their unmet needs, but don't necessarily participate in these online conversations.
My observation is just that the patient advocacy community drives much better communities and community resources and open dialogues than I think an industry forum ever could. For multiple reasons that would take another hour to probably go through. But we have really that same experience. And my other observation would be that, pharma companies aren't particularly social, right? That two-way dialogue in the e-space there's really a lack of two-way communication. As Jane had said, there may be more of a push of information. So we are kind of the social connectors in essence for our companies out to these communities.
There was a couple questions we didn't get to, but one question that I can answer very quickly before our time is up is that will you provide the slides and the transcript? And I am informed by BioNJ that yes, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the BioNJ website. So now I'm going to turn this back over to Deb.
Well, thank you so much to our panel, Jean Campbell, Jane Gershkowitz, Diane Getz, and Kara Thompson. A very compelling session. We very much appreciate your time. We hope that for those of you on the phone that we've helped you develop your thinking on this important topic. Please watch for additional initiatives, additional information on the BioNJ Patient Advocacy Initiative, including at our annual meeting on February 7th. Again, www.bionj.org for the recording of this. With that, I would say this is BioNJ's last event of the year. Our meeting manager is thrilled to celebrate that, and we wish you happy holidays and much health and happiness in the new year. We'll see you at our annual meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you.